This morning, as the video said, we are continuing our series within our reach. And this has been our Advent season series on Sunday mornings. And really, we've been looking at Advent in a new way. This idea of what Jesus brought within our reach. We've been looking at the themes that show up in Christmas rather than this kind of step-by-step expository kind of look at the story of Jesus and each step of the way. We've been looking at these themes that show up. For some of us, this season is full of bright colors, yesterday's memories and memorable traditions. And for others, this season is actually much darker. It's full of sadness. It's full of tension, especially family tension. There's loneliness. There's painful reminders of those that we've lost or those that we are missing. However, even in these moments where everything feels all right, or even in these moments where we are struggling and wrestling to just feel peace in the Advent season, Christmas season, reminds us of these themes that we are studying, of how Jesus brings his hope, his peace, his joy, and his love within our reach. Within our reach has been this 5-week journey of rediscovering how Jesus brought hope, peace, joy, and love within our reach through the story of Christmas, as we also learn the implications of that reality and what they are for our lives. Last week we looked at how really the story of Christmas is one that has been defined and even is full of hope. And we looked at prophecies from the prophet Isaiah, who hundreds of years before the time of Jesus began to encourage God's people by sharing what was on God's heart, by encouraging them with hope of what was to come. They waited with expectation and anticipation for God to fulfill his promises. And here in this moment, as we celebrate Christmas, we realize that Jesus is a fulfillment of that hopeful promise, bringing even greater hope to those of us who have committed to following him. Now, for me, there's really something nostalgic about listening to classic Christmas songs on vinyl records. To be honest, this nostalgic experience and practice has been one that I've loved for years, well before hipsters and indie types made collecting records popular and fun again. But it's something that I've always looked forward to. Some of my favorites to spin have always been those albums by Dean Martin, Nat King Cole, Bing Crosby, John Denver and the Muppets, and Andy Williams. And lately, as the picture shows, that what's been on my record player constantly has been this Christmas song album, a 1961 release from Nat King Cole. I guess there's something I find special about when the kids are finally in bed and the record player is spinning and the lights are dim low and the candle is kind of dancing on its wick. The dim room fills with the pastel hues of the glowing lights of the Christmas tree, which quickly becomes the focal point of the room. The warm voice of Nat King Cole just bellows out and from the speakers and kind of cuts through the silence. It's kind of in that experience that I say that I experience a Dickens-like vortex, right? If you've seen Charles Dickens, if you've read his book, or if you've seen the many plays and movies that have come out, right? Charles Dickens' main character, Scrooge, gets visited by Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future. And in this space, when I have Nat King Cole on and the lights are low and I'm just reflecting there as the candle is lit, I find myself reflecting too on this vortex of Christmas past, Christmas present, and even looking to Christmas future. And what I always find, and I know that you have your own traditions that will prove this true for you too, is that there's something peaceful, usually, about looking at Christmas past. There's something about looking back on those memories, those traditions, those things that are nostalgic for us. I think my love for nostalgic Christmas actually comes from my experiences growing up and really from the influences of my grandparents. Now, neither of my grandparents are still living. Both celebrated Christmas in their own unique ways. ways that have left me with peaceful memories. My paternal grandparents, my dad's parents, were huge decorators. My grandmother loved the Christmas classics from the 40s and the 50s. It's where I've developed my love for Nat King Cole. She had multiple Christmas trees in her house, each with a different theme. There was a Santa Claus tree. There was a classic candle tree, right? There was 3 or 4 trees at all point in her house during Christmas. She had a huge Santa Claus collection. She had vintage decorations in every corner. You could barely walk. There were robotic Santa Clauses. There were Christmas trees on sticks in the yard, and it just filled the house. My grandfather ensured that there was always this huge Christmas village that was set up, and trains that would run under the tree and through the house, and all different scales and all different types. Now, my maternal grandmother and grandfather were much different in the way that they celebrated. But still, my memories of Christmases and those experiences growing up are full of warmth. When I'd visit my grandparents on my mother's side around the holidays, there was always a smell of baking in the air. And I mean always. My favorite memories involve sitting in a den in their old farmhouse style. Their farm, they had this den that was kind of in a farmhouse. And my favorite memories involve sitting in there after a huge meal that literally took up the dining room, the living room, and the den. And we would just connect these long tables and make this long kind of runway. How many of you do that in your house, right? You kind of have to connect all these 10-foot tables to make this big gathering space. And afterwards, we'd always joke around, right, and have a lot of fun time. That's me right there. I heard you found me there already, right? There was always some fun that was to be had. And I have these fond memories. And no, they didn't decorate. I remember my grandpa going up onto the hill and grabbing a pine out of his kind of little wooded area there and dragging it down and decorating it very simply. My Christmas decorations and traditions are really a hybrid of these experiences. My wife says I decorate like an old lady. I like to spin the classics. But I really desire to create a simpler and unforgettable time of laughter and smells around a meal. Now, the nostalgia of Christmas classics on vinyl and those similar memories that we all have bring us this sense of rewarding peace, right? We look back into times in which we remember a moment in Christmas history for us that is full of peace. We love traditions. We love storytelling around this time of the year because it helps us tiptoe back into those peaceful memories, look back into a time where everything felt right in the world. There was certainly a powerful lure and even encouragement that we experience as we reflect and as we look back at Christmas past. The danger, the problem, the trouble is that sometimes when we look back, it can also create a lure that is also a trap for our minds. And we get stuck thinking that peace and happiness and the way everything was yesterday was so much better than it will ever be again. While hindsight is 20/20, the other reality of that is most of those memories in which we have, if we'd be honest with ourselves, were not as perfect and always right in the world and peaceful as we like to remember them. I'm sure at some point I did something dumb and got in trouble during that Christmas, right? You can tell it's on my face. Hindsight is 20/20, but we have this way of looking backwards and finding peace in the stories of Christmas, the nostalgia of Christmas past, and kind of embellishing the truth or the reality of what those days were really like. And truthfully, we're probably okay with a little bit of that unconscious embellishment because we desire Christmas time to feel like peace. We want it to feel like everything is all right in the world. We want that because Christmas has long been steeped in hope, prayers, and desires for peace in the world, peace in our life, and peace in our families. This week I was making a conscious effort, and I listen to Christmas music this time of the year nonstop in my car, at home, in my office. And as I was listening, I was saying, well, I'll just talk about some of these songs in which we experience our hopes, our prayers, our desires for peace. You know what happened? There's too many of them. Every Christmas carol, almost, every Christmas song, almost, has incorporated in some way this hope of peace. This desire that there will be peace in our life, peace on earth, and peace in our families. Finds itself in almost all of our Christmas carols and classics. Finds itself as the happy ending in all of our Lifetime movies. We find ourselves living lives that speak of having peace in the past, forgetting to celebrate what we have in the present. Something behind me? And loss in the future. We look backwards so much at what it was that we kind of can't see anything peaceful about the future. The future holds nothing but loss and sadness. It's true that Christmas should be a reminder of peace for us all. It's through the story of Christmas that we realize that Jesus, and we see it time and time again throughout his story and even the prophets leading up to his story, it should and brought peace within our reach. This morning, as we look at how the story of Jesus and his presence through the story of Christmas brings us peace, we're going to see that Jesus actually brings us a peace that doesn't look to the past, but rather a peace that looks to the future. Last week we read the prophet Isaiah, who hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus began to encourage people with the hope of what the coming Messiah would mean. He speaks in Isaiah 9, when we looked at, he speaks of peace. Isaiah speaks of a time in which every warrior's boot that is used in battle and every garment that has been rolled in blood will now be destined for burning and will be used for nothing but to fuel the fire. When the Messiah comes, you guys can have great hope, because even though we're living in this fearful time of what the North Country is going to do to us, you guys, when the Messiah comes, there's going to be peace. And Isaiah goes on, he even says, he will be the Prince of Peace, and to the end there will be no peace of his peace there will be no end. It's this kingdom of peace that he will be a prince of, that will have no end. And at the time of Jesus' birth, now skipping ahead hundreds of years later after the prophet Isaiah, God's people were desperately looking for this hope, this promise of peace, just as we are in this crazy and violent world. And like they were getting in the trap of looking backwards and remembering the glory days, much glorious than they really were. They were remembering them to be full of joy and hope and love, but in all honesty, they weren't. In fact, for hundreds of years, the Jewish people were governed by foreign rule. The Egyptians, the Syrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and now Rome. These empires had control of their economy, their culture, their history, and their lives. They occasionally had experienced freedom, but only sporadically. They had experienced independence, but only for short times. Now, the Roman government practiced an acceptance of all religious beliefs. They were okay with whatever your philosophical leaning and teaching was. They were okay with any model of government, as long as they recognized the almost deity state of the Roman Empire. The Jews began to develop a distrust and hatred for the Roman Empire. And to the Roman Empire, they were unwilling subjects. At the time of Jesus' birth, the local Roman ruler, King Herod, had initiated a massacre of all Jewish babies born at the time. Herod was also responsible for placing forbidden idols in their temple. They were not only losing safety of their finances and of their health and their wealth and their lives and their independence, they were also losing the peace of their religion. They were losing the values of their religion. Rome was even beginning to step into the way the church or the synagogues were operating. Jews came to understand the world to be divided in their jadedness between two types of people. There were Jews and Gentiles. There were Jews and there were Gentiles. They found themselves ruled then by what they could not stand. And the Jewish people accepted their freedom in both their governing system and maintaining their own traditions. The Jewish people were allowed to have those, yet the Roman government required that everything actually had to be subject to them. What kind of freedom is that? The Jewish religious system was divided at this time into two warring parties, much like our Democratic and Republican divisions. The Pharisees, the people's party, thought the law and traditions kind of were the people's party. They taught the law and the traditions. And then there were the Sadducees, these were more wealthy and conservative leaders who rejected traditions and the way things were in favor of finding ways to cooperate with the Roman Empire. Their differences as they warred in the public squares and as they debated in synagogues was literally polarizing the Jewish people. So, everyday people found themselves overtaxed, found themselves without an identity in their own synagogue. They found themselves ruled by foreign rule. And now their own religious leaders, those people who should be promising them peace, or warring against each other in their differences. The economy of first century Israel was really supported by three things: agriculture, trade, and large government building projects, which were really the project of King Herod. And he was in this place of kind of cities that had been destroyed in battles and in uprisings. He was in the process of rebuilding those. And when we think of Jesus and his family as carpenters, most likely they were employed in one of these kind of building projects. He wasn't building cabinets and desks for your home and pews for the churches and the synagogues. Right? What Jesus was most likely doing was slaving with his father in these work projects, these things that Herod was all about: palaces, ports, fortresses, stadiums. He wanted his city to shine. In the middle of this, Jewish leaders were fighting for their freedom, the purity of their beliefs, the peace of yesterday, and upholding the identity of their people in a changing world and getting ready for this coming of Messiah. They wanted peace. And we pick up the story this morning in that time, which is similar to a refugee in a war-torn country. Peace seems like a foreign concept. They want it. They are wrestling to understand it. They want to believe and see God's promise of peace, but really they would just settle for there being an absence of conflict. It's during that time an angel appears to Mary in this changing, confusing, and violent and oppressive time. And he tells this young girl, who doesn't even have her own identity worked out yet, that she is going to be the mother of the Messiah. Mary looks at the angel, says, "How can that be?" But what we see after that, after she asks her question, she finds herself in a moment of resignation and even surrender. She makes peace with what it is, and she confesses, "I am the Lord's servant," Mary answered. "May your word to me be fulfilled." And then the angel left her. Mary makes an inner peace with the journey that God has her on and surrenders to him in the middle of an already rough situation. A situation for a woman in this era that is only going to get more rough. There's nothing nostalgic, comfortable, or peaceful about the real story of Christmas. Mary isn't walking into a peaceful situation, even though she knows the coming of the Messiah means peace. And we pick up the story where Mary has just learned of her pregnancy from an angel and escapes to the countryside to visit her uncle Zechariah and Aunt Elizabeth. And even as Mary approaches, we see that Aunt Elizabeth notices this inner peace that is happening in Mary. And she says, "Blessed is she, blessed are you, the one who's believed that the Lord will fulfill his promises to her." As she's on this journey, as we begin to read this song, this prophetic proclamation, she kind of releases from her place of inner peace. We see that she is at peace with the journey that God has put her on. We're going to look this morning at Luke 1:46 through 56. Mary's just seen her aunt, who is also pregnant in her old age, and something unlocks in her. She looks at her aunt, as she looks at Elizabeth, and she just bursts into this, a lot of times the NIV will call it Mary's song, but it's really this prophetic proclamation. It's just this declaration that comes from the peace that she has with God. And listen to it. And Mary says, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior." Just let that sit in there for a minute. The stuff she's walking through as a woman in her era, as a person who has to live every day in this oppressive era, in this time that is so polarized, Mary says, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior." If that's a sense of peace, I don't know. If that's not a sense of peace, I don't know what is. "For he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant." Ironically, if you have a King James Bible or some other translations, what they translate there, she says, low estate, right? She doesn't see herself as worthy real estate. But she knows that Jesus does. "For he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. For now on all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation. And he has performed mighty deeds." And you'll begin to hear here, she's echoing what we read in Isaiah 9, right? The sense of mighty, the sense of miraculous. "He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their innermost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but he has sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, just as he promised our ancestors." Mary stayed with Elizabeth for about 3 months, and she returned home. Mary erupts into this prophetic proclamation, this song from this place of inner peace in which she's experienced with God on this rough journey she's on. And so much so, she looks at her suffering people, the people around her that are in the same plight of humanity that she's in, and she says, God has filled them with good things, but he sends the rich away hungry. Now, in this time, the religious people weren't the only polarizations happening. The polarization between the rich and the poor were also constantly getting farther and farther apart. Mary says, when God showed up, it was peaceful because he gives good things to the hungry. So as Mary's staying with her aunt, excuse me, as Mary's staying with her aunt Elizabeth, a little time after this eruption of her song, her aging aunt also miraculously gives birth to John the Baptist, who will be a forerunner to Jesus. Mary's uncle, a priest, also has this similar prophetic proclamation that he sings over his son, and in turn even kind of proclaims some things about the coming of Jesus as Mary's gathered there with him. Uncle Zacharias says that Jesus will shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death to guide our feet into the path of peace. So we see the prophet Isaiah has promised peace. We see that angels are telling Mary and everyone that, hey, this guy is going to be a source of peace. We see Mary make peace with where God is calling her, and she speaks that he is bringing a justice and peace to his people. And on top of that, then Uncle Zacharias stands up and says, this Messiah that's coming, he's going to be known for what? He's going to be known for peace. He's going to guide our feet in the path of peace. Now, ironically, the word for peace there is not the Jewish word shalom. It's a word that was actually used in Jewish cultures as a farewell. It actually means that I hope you have completeness, especially within regards to your health and your wealth. Two things that they were not experiencing at all. So as Uncle Zacharias stands up, he has his proclamation, his prophetic proclamation. He actually says that Jesus, when he comes, is going to guide our feet into a sense of peace in our health and our wealth. And it actually incorporates also this idea of healing of our brokenness so that we can experience that health and wealth. Zechariah proclaims that Jesus' light will shine on those that are now living in the darkness. It will transform them. It'll heal them. It'll guide them into the thing they really, really need to experience, peace. However, notice that the peace that they're given isn't this thing they wanted. It isn't this, bam, now you have it. Everyone is at peace. You get to live in it. It doesn't overtake them. It is something they need to they need to choose to live into, to accept, to follow, to be guided in. From this passage, I think there's a few takeaways for us as we look at how peace shows up in a Christmas story. In a Christmas story, we see that the coming of Jesus meant peace. Isaiah prophesies that Jesus' full reign will bring peace to those who have seen the light. In fact, it will have no end to people that had never experienced independence for very long. That seemed really great. Mary declares that Jesus will extend mercy or peaceful compassion, if we break that word down, to those who follow him. Mary also declares that Jesus will perform miracles that bring a healing peace to them. And Mary also says that God's peace comes with a justice that strengthens or lifts up the humble and disarms the proud, those who are oppressing them. Peace takes many forms. For many of us, as we've pointed out, looking backwards is peaceful to us. Looking at Christmases of yesterday is peaceful. For some of you, I know getting the new iPhone X will be peaceful. The Jewish people thought that the Messiah would overthrow Rome and make his eternal kingdom rule, bringing peace. However, Jesus, as he shows up, brings a different kind of peace. He brings something that transforms us, that kind of surrenders us at an inner level. God's peace, according to Mary's proclamation, revolves around the ideas of humility, compassion, and justice. If we look at this prophetic proclamation that Mary makes, this song, we broke it down, there are really three themes that show up in it: humility, compassion, and justice. The power of peace with God, as Mary confesses, is that God is focused on the humble, those who are spiritually seeking, not spiritually proud. He is performing mighty acts with his mighty arms, this miraculous sense. And he's bringing down the proud and oppressive leaders. God strengthens the humble by holding them up. He gives them good things, and he sends the rich away empty-handed. He, in doing this, has fulfilled his promise to bless the whole world through Abraham's descendants. We even watch these ideas constantly unpack these ideas of peace as Jesus grows up. We watch the Roman Empire begin to unravel around the work of peaceful followers of Jesus who are working for justice. Jesus never focuses his ministry on the masses, but humble to those who are humble in their spiritual search, whether if they're clean or not. He brings them peace in the middle of their distraught life by bringing his presence. Not presence of peace. He brings his presence of peace. And those who thought they had peace now are confused, and they find nothing but confusion in Jesus. In the Christmas story, God's peace comes for the humble with compassion and justice. And 2,000 years later, after the birth of Jesus, the world at Christmas time is still focused on peace. You've seen it in commercials. You've heard it in our songs. It's in our movies. And we even say, I wish for world peace. The idea of peace has long been incorporated and transformed into the message of Christmas because it was who Jesus was. It was what was promised with him. In this passage, we also see that peace means we have a chance. Mary in her song is speaking about this new reality that's available for God's people. God brings the humble and the downtrodden a chance, an opportunity for God's peace, his justice and compassion. He also brings them a peace that looks to the future, not the past. Mary and Zechariah describe the chance for peace as something that they are looking forward to and living into. Why do we always find ourselves looking to the past for peace? We find the Christmas story actually gives us a chance at peace and for peace and with peace in the future. The peace of Jesus is also one that brings holistic healing. And last week we saw Isaiah say that Jesus will come with healing, miraculous power. Mary said he will uphold the humble and bring down oppressive rulers. It's this peace and healing justice for the humble and downtrodden that will allow them to experience this Jesus transforming inner peace. This is a great hope in a season where we naturally long for peace in the world. There was a hope and peace for his audience that as they gathered around this ghetto scene in a stable, realized that they were beat and battered. But right there, sitting there in the muck and the mire, was really the best hope and the source of peace for them. In this passage, we also see that peace is the promise that we have a choice. God never made us pawns. He gave us the choice to not eat from the tree that he put in the garden. He told us he desired us not to, but he gave us the choice to eat it. God didn't force us to follow him. He invites us to. He gave his people a king when they wanted it, even though what he wanted was for them to want him. Likewise, Jesus doesn't force peace as he's born in a manger. He gives us the chance at peace. But we personally must make the choice. But too often God's people, us, the Jewish people too, miss his point. The prophets, Mary, Zechariah, all proclaimed that Jesus was bringing this chance for peace. However, because it looked so different, they overlooked it. Because it meant that they had to respond to it and roll up their sleeves and actually work for it and be part of it, they ignored it. We must make the choice to actually accept Jesus' peace. We cannot be transformed unless we make the willing and intentional choice and to accept the chance. We've all seen the bumper stickers that say, "No Jesus, no peace." I always kind of laugh at these because they just feel kind of cheesy. Sorry if you have any of these on your car. As cheesy as these are, though, there's a theological and biblical reality to them. We cannot expect that Jesus' peace will redefine our lives and our world on a macro level unless we accept his goodness. We must resign to God's peace. It's what we see Mary doing. It's where this song comes from. When the angel tells Mary about the rough road she must walk, she says, "May your word to me be fulfilled." It's from this place of resigned surrender and peace that we see that Mary proclaims that God's peace is available with compassion and justice for the humble. Lastly, peace is the realization that we have a challenge. When we see the chance for peace and we make the choice to be transformed by peace and to follow God's peace, we must find that we also are presented with this reality or this realization that we have a challenge to live God's peace to others around us. Did you notice how Mary proclaimed several times, twice, about generations? Mary proclaims that God has used her humble servant, this sense of low real estate, as an example for all generations. She now will represent what it means to live out mercy and humility and compassion to all of the generations. And then she goes on to say God's mercy is available and extending to everyone who will follow or fear him from generation to generation. Mary realizes that God has invested in her and, as she says later in her proclamation, has filled the hungry with good things and realizes God expects a return on his investment. The investments are a challenge that are to be used and poured out from generation to generation, generation to generation. These good things and investments include God's peace. And it comes to the humble through compassion and justice. When we ourselves have been transformed by making the choice at the chance we've received to experience God's inner peace, it automatically must challenge us and move us to also be agents of compassion and justice in the world around us. We might say that we do what we know, and if you're not working for God's peace, have you been transformed by the opportunity for it? The Christmas story, the story of Advent, is one that is reminding us of what we know. And what we know is that peace has long been defined in the Christmas story because Jesus has come to bring peace within our reach. shouldn't surprise us that Jesus, even at Christmas, inspires us to accept the challenge of living peace to the world around us, because as he grows up, one of the first things he does is gather people on a mountainside. The chance, choice, and challenge of peace is then announced, embodied, and demonstrated time and time again throughout the life of Jesus. But maybe nowhere else clearer than the Beatitudes, where Jesus makes the DNA of his kingdom evident. As he gathers them, he brings them this same prophesied reality of his birth back to the surface. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. In other words, God's favor blesses those who see the chance for peace, who make the choice to live in it, to be transformed of it, and accept the challenge to live it out to those around us as peacemakers. It is those who do that, who accept the challenge, that will be known as the children of God. God has given us a chance for peace, and that sense of peace and our humility has been known throughout many people in the Bible. Daniel says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. The test of someone who has been transformed by God's peace is if they are known for looking and working for peace in the future, or if they're looking and working for peace of yesterday. If you've been transformed by the peace of Jesus, the peace that you experience forces you, mobilizes, moves you to see the future with peace. If you're constantly looking backwards and only finding peace in yesterday, the question begs, have you experienced the peace that God has offered? Watchman Nee, a Chinese church leader, says, a born-again Christian ought to possess unspeakable peace in the Spirit. Is that true for you in this season? For some of us, it's hard to get into the sense of peace in this season, but do you sense that your spirit has this unspeakable peace? Brother Lawrence, who was known for his smuggling of Bibles, says, we must do business faithfully, recalling our mind to God mildly, and with tranquility or peace, as often as we find it wandering from him. To experience, to remind ourselves to be transformed by God's peace so that we can accept the challenge, be transformed of it, and live it out to others, we must find ourselves constantly in the Advent season recalling our minds to God. There is no peace away from him. He is the source of peace. The lore, nostalgia, and the embellishment of Christmas as yesteryear is not wrong. I enjoy it. But we must be careful that we do not become trapped by it. That we are not unable to look to the future with peace, with new things, and the future itself. May this Advent season remind us as followers of Jesus that we must be transformed by his peace in a way that gives us unspeakable peace in our spirit, because we've seen our chance, we've made our choice, and now we are accepting the challenge to have our feet guided in the way of peace. That we may be peacemakers of God's mercy for generations.